identify an independent and dependent variable, as well as describing a situation from a graph. We will also look at domain and range as an interval rather than just a list of x's or y values. So, the first thing we want to look at is, what is an independent variable? So an independent variable is something that can stand alone, something that will go on regardless of what the other variable is doing. Time is a great example of an independent variable. That clock keeps ticking regardless of what else is happening. Usually it happens to be your x-axis that is the independent and your y-axis that is dependent. However, that's not always the case. Your dependent variable is something that depends on the independent. So when something is working together, for example, below we have the height of a football after it's kicked downfield, and we also have the time of the game. Well, time is something that continues and will keep going on, so that is your independent variable. The height of the football depends on the time. So when the time had just begun, the football had not been kicked and was still on the ground. After a few seconds, as time went on, the football's height grew and then dropped back to the ground. In the middle, the football is reaching its max height in the air. This makes height dependent on time. Whenever you're given a situation, you want to analyze your graph just like that. In the second example, we have a situation where the stock is going up and down, and it's doing that over time. So again, time is your independent. The price of your stock is the dependent variable. At first, the price is moderate. It takes a giant leap up. At this point, it spikes and goes back down, so the price drops. You have another spike and it goes back up, and then it drops again, and we're not sure from there what it's going to do. So sometimes we won't have necessarily a situation, however we might have a piece of a graph where we need to identify what's the domain and the range that I have to work with. If you have a solid line, as we do here, that means that all of the points in between those points that you have that are even, the box points, those are included in our domain and our range. So rather than listing out all those tiny little fractions and decimals in between, we want to just write an interval. Technically, it's impossible to list out all of those numbers because there's an infinite amount of decimals in between each box. So when I look at my domain, we said that's our x values. And my first x value here, if this is my axis, the first x value is at 0. And then as we go over, the biggest x value we use is 3. So my domain's interval would be 0 to 3. And we're enclosing that with a bracket so we know that 0 and 3 are included in our domain. For y values, we want to look at the lowest value we have. Well, the lowest y value we have is at positive 1. The highest y value we have is at 1, 2, 3, 4. So our range is from 1 to 4. If you see a graph with arrows at the end, that means that it keeps going and going and going. So we would have a situation where you could have every number in the book, and we call that all real numbers. And that is a situation we will look at later.